I learned that as individuals, we're the same, and if you treat people with love and respect, you get it back. And I used to get down on my knees or haunches and talk to the patients, and the staff was very concerned that I was going to get hit. I didn't get hit.
My mother was saying, "Jane, cry, please, just cry. That's all he wants you to do. If you'd cry, he'll stop beating you." And I will never forget it, laying on that floor, hearing my mother cry, crying, begging me to cry, and me laying there feeling bad that I couldn't cry because all I could think was cry. What is there to cry about? Well, Randy, and those of you listening, I grew up in Payson, Utah. If you're from Utah and you knew Payson in the good old days, we actually call it Payson. You got to say it a certain way. My father was an alcoholic, and my father's father was an alcoholic. As I got older and realized that I had an alcohol problem, my mother told me the first time she ever saw me drunk, I was 5 years old. I'd been with my father. That drinking at a young age turned into addiction problem of marijuana and other drugs by the time I was in 5th grade. Growing up, I thought that was pretty tough. I thought that was pretty cool. To me, honestly, it was fun. It was enjoyment. I think I knew back then, although I don't know how often I ever really admitted it, that it was an escape to keep from having to deal with everything. I found it very easy with drugs and alcohol to be able to pretend like nothing really mattered. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, so Utah certainly didn't get into the hippie era too much, but there was certainly some of the good stuff that they don't have around today back in the 60s, even in Payson, Utah. So my father was, especially during his drinking years, he was very abusive. He kind of raised me as his son, even though I'm his daughter. As I grew up, of course, and especially as I moved away from the addiction and the alcoholism and began to learn that people can change, I learned a lot about what my father must have gone through when he was a child. Though that's a process of, I wouldn't ever recommend anybody, honestly, just jump into that. Go through the process, go through that process of I was abused. Actually, as I went through counseling years later, they actually called it a ritualistic abuse, just because of the way the family was called in and everybody had a place to sit. The last time I remember being beat by my father, I think I was about 16 years old. I'd come home probably about 10 minutes late from a MIA practice, kind of a mutual something, and my teacher dropped me off 10 minutes late, and I went in, and they were all sitting in their designated areas in the front room, and my father was standing in the center of the room, which is when it was displayed out like that, I was going to the center of the room, and I went to the center of the room, and he began to ask me, Where you been? I've been to church, and it hit me. What did you do? We did roadshow practice, and he hit me with questioning, continuing like that, and his slugging me, literally, not slapping, hitting me with his fist. I eventually ended up on the floor on my face, which was pretty common, and then he's kicking me and stomping me in the head. And he's not asking me questions anymore. I'm actually semi-conscious, to be honest with you, probably. And I began to hear somebody crying, saying my name, and as I became consciously aware of that again, I recognized the voices as my mother's. My mother was saying, "Jane, cry, please, just cry. That's all he wants you to do. If you'd cry, he'll stop beating you." And I will never forget it, laying on that floor, hearing my mother crying, begging me to cry, and me laying there feeling bad that I couldn't cry because all I could think was cry. What is there to cry about? That's how bad it got to by the time I was 16 years old. I don't know if it's obvious, but I did become very wild after that. More so wild. I saw a lot of not just violence on me, but, my father was very proud, which I think as an addict alcoholic we have a tendency to be. My father wouldn't accept help, wouldn't ask for help. If help was offered, it was offered through my mother, and my mother would warn the people, don't even try to help Vance. Don't try to help. I've even somewhat struggled with that today as an adult with decades of recovery. That what I like to think of it as humility, and yet there's times I've realized my humility is pride in disguise. So, by the time I did graduate from high school in Payson, and after that I went on to college. I'd only been to college for a few weeks when I got kicked off of campus and lost my scholarship for dealing dope. I didn't go home. I didn't tell my parents. I stayed down there. I graduated from high school in 1970. 1972, I gave birth to a child that I adopted out through LDS Social Services. And that was an event in my life, Randy, that had me think, you know what, I need to change. I'm going home, thinking I could go home and change. I went home. I told my parents it's the only time I've ever seen my father cry, ever seen a tear come from my father's eye, was when I told him I had a baby boy and I gave him away without even seeing him. I never said anything, but he had a tear come out of his eye. I started going to church. I crossed all my T's and dotted all of my I's to put my life back together. And then I think I'm going to get married. I'm going to go through the LDS temple. I'm going to get married. And the man, or boy, I guess I'd say at this age, I'll call him a boy, the kid I was going to marry, then we were going to go through the temple. I won't tell you the whole version of it. But his family had a family home evening and decided that basically if he married me, they told him his mother would roll over in her grave because of my history. And at the time, I'm trying to be understanding and in different things, and he wanted to elope, and I'm like, no, we're not going to go elope. And anyway, on the way home from a date one night, he actually looked at me and he said, "Are you pregnant?" I'm like, "We haven't done anything." I'm thinking, this guy's really naive. He doesn't know what it takes. And he says, "I know that, but my father said, once always a." So I turned my radio up. That's all it took. I turned my radio up. We're in my car, my 61 Windsor. Still want one of them again today. I pulled up, got off the exit of I-15 in Payson. I pulled up in front of the house, and he turned my radio down, and I let him turn it down. And then he said that the night before, when I took him home, his elbow had brushed my chest, and I didn't slap him or do anything about it, and so I must be a bad girl again. When he reached over to kiss me goodnight, I just told him, "Get out of my car." He got out of my car, and I never went home again. I went to Provo, sat on Center Street. I got right back into it. In fact, that was the first night, to be honest with you, I actually had a needle in my arm that night. First time I'd ever had a needle. I went really out at that time. I don't know if you've heard this before, Randy.
What year was this? I've heard a lot of this, but what year?
Well, now we're talking probably 1973 is what we're probably talking at this point. So at that point, I ended up, I actually had me a sugar daddy. I had some family and friends that helped set me up that way, so I had a place to stay. Actually, I had a sugar daddy. I got involved doing some pretty serious crimes. I got involved in doing some serious drug dealing. Robbed a Payson liquor store. In fact, I'm the first person ever to rob a Payson liquor store. It went on until it got to a point where I knew it was absolutely insane. And yet it seemed that there was no way out. I kept talking to one of my family that was involved, one of my cousins, about that I was just going to go turn myself into the cops and tell them to lock me up. And he's telling me, "You can't do that. You know what they do. We're not going to put up with that. We're going to kill you. You can't do that." So I did go eventually. I went to Mac Hawley, who was Utah County Sheriff at the time, and he did not want, I told him everything I'd done. He didn't want me. He wanted people I was involved with. I left because I wasn't going to talk with him about others. I wanted to change me. I didn't want to change the world. Anyway, I went home that day and sitting with a needle in my arm, and my mom and my big sister, who I hadn't seen probably since that last night I left with my fiance from Payson almost a year earlier, somehow had found me, and they came walking in, and they took one look at me sitting at the table with needle in my arm, and they turned and walked back out, and they went to the cops. I went into the bedroom. I got a case of guns, case of bullets, put them in the back of the truck, and I hit it up University Ave in Provo. I got my answer. I'll just go blow my brains out. It's the only way out. Mom and my sister had gone to the police. I got pulled over. I got arrested, and from there I began my maximum security time. I actually went to the Utah State Mental Hospital, Ward 56, maximum security, as an alternative to prison. They don't have the program anymore, but back then it was called the Public Offender Program, the POP program. We were security and hands-on staff for all of the criminally insane. It was a pretty tough program. I wouldn't recommend anybody go through that kind of a program today. That program got done away with when the Utah State Hospital went joint commission. They wouldn't let them do some things they were doing at that time. Long story short, if this has been short, after that, after 56, I ended up being released early from maximum security at 56 because I rewrote the therapeutic community model program so that it met JCAH standards, and they hired me. So I went same day from being an inmate on the public offender program as an alternative to prison on the maximum security, the Utah State Mental Hospital, to being administration.
So tell me how you go from, how do you rewrite a program in maximum security?
Well, I had a staff member. One thing that I think I've learned and I've come to believe is that it takes other people in the system willing to step out of the system's roles at times to be able to help. Actually, for me to be able to rewrite the program, for me to have a pencil and a paper was against the rules. I couldn't have a pencil and a paper at the time that I rewrote it. I was actually in seclusion when I rewrote it. I spent quite a bit of time on maximum security in seclusion. I couldn't look another human being in the eye. It was complete silent treatment. I couldn't even sign language or nod. No, any communication kind of a response while I was in seclusion. For some reason, a staff member sent the posse down, the other POP down, during meals when she was on shift in the afternoons. And she handed me a piece of paper and a pencil, and she talked to me through my seclusion room about what she wanted me to do. And it took me 2 or 3 times of her doing that for me to realize she wasn't trying to set me up. Because I had been set up in these programs before. Not everybody is there for your benefit. So after 2 or 3 times of this, I call her CC, Carol. Her name was actually Carol Clindenton. Pretty awesome lady. She, after the third time of her telling me what she wanted me to do and sliding a piece of paper and a pencil through the little window where they put your tray for your meal in your seclusion room, handed me that and giving it back to her is mechanically the way that I did it. Other than that, I'll tell you what, you live in an institution with criminally insane, I'm talking, Ted Bundy was actually there in 1976, so he was there after I was. Shortly after I was. It might have been 77 that Ted was there, but we're talking criminally insane, very dangerous people. I won't go into detail right now about that, but and then you're locked up as much as I was in seclusion. You can hear, by the way, a key sounds going in a door, who's putting the key in. A person's breath. You could hear what they were thinking and what was really going on with them by the way they walked or their breath that they took or things. So, knowing, being able to be that isolated and yet being that aware of everything going on. I knew the program the whole time I got locked up, and I knew what was good about the program and what wasn't helping about the program. Honestly, it may sound a little crazy, but I think it got to the point where, by the way, somebody put their key in the door, and the POPs had the keys too. So is that the way that you meant your question, or did you have it another way?
Essentially, you didn't ask. Did you ask for this paper?
Oh, no. I don't know what Carol what the hey she was thinking, that she's like, oh, well, here, won't you rewrite the program? No, we were not supposed to have paper or pencil when we were on a deep freeze, and I think we were on a deep freeze at that time. Somebody was supposed to rewrite the program. The patients and the POPs were supposed to rewrite the program, but certainly not Janey Marvin sitting in seclusion. Absolutely not.
I like your experience as far as how our senses can become ultra alert and aware. I've never had an experience like yours to that degree, but the other night I was putting my 1-year-old boy to bed, and it was late, and it's the rare occasion that I have to do that. His mom had a migraine, and she says, look, he's yours too, you take him. So I'm trying to get him to bed. It's like 3 a.m, and I finally get him in his crib, and I'm like, okay, now I just have to get out of this room. And I swear from his crib to the door was the longest 3 minutes of my life, because I heard every single noise that floor made. I could hear the lights buzzing in the kitchen. I could hear the creaks in the wood. I could hear the fan on in the next room. And all that stuff has always been going on in my life, but I had never come aware of it until it was quiet, and I had a purpose to try to get out of the room. So I can imagine, these people that go meditate for hours on end. There's like this whole another realm of existence that takes place within ourselves, right? When we tune into our senses. And ultimately that's what gave you I would explain it as a spiritual connection with very little distractions, where you were able to really connect on a spiritual level. Would that be accurate?
Oh, I definitely think so. Especially, I think I probably did a grand total of maybe 9 months in an actual seclusion. And even though there were people watching me all the time, and that the lack of eye contact. In fact, honestly, Randy, I don't know if you've noticed, I still kind of look around when I look at you. I've done it. I worked for years to consciously, I do groups, and so to consciously look at people in the eye really took a lot of work after having gone through that. But so I got that disconnected too, not able to look at you. I can't do any communicating as though there's any response on my behalf with anything going on in my environment. And so, yes, became very super sensitive to what the environment, a whole different level, you might say, of what that environment was, what was really going on, what that environment really meant, not what it looked like, what was real, what's underneath the surface here in this environment. So
okay, well, thank you, Linda. Let's Janey and Linda, they own this facility together, and they're both an important part of my life. When I came to this facility, they were both here, and they're both here today. So this is where I wanted to start this journey of this podcast. I wanted to start it right here where I should, which is with Janey and Linda. So Linda, if you will, Janey's kind of led us up to the point as far as addictions are involved. I know that you've never quit, as Janey says, you've never quit doing drugs. And that's because you've never started, right? Having said that, I know that you've had a lot of life experiences and personal experiences that have prepared you and led you to where you are today, specifically to Janey. So can you share with us how you met Janey, how all that came to be, and up until the point where you guys started MATR?
Well, my background is completely different than Janey's. I have 10 children. I was an at-home mom for most of that time, active in the LDS church, involved in PTA, those kinds of things. I finally got frustrated with my life environment and knew that if my family with 10 children was going to be taken care of, I was going to have to take care of it. And so at the age of 42, I went back to school for nursing. I graduated with my RN in 1991, and within a couple of weeks, because for some strange reason, though I already worked at the hospital that I was applying at as an LPN, I couldn't seem to get hired as an RN. And so I picked up the phone and called the state hospital and asked if they were hiring RNs, and they were. The first job I interviewed for, I was hired and ended up on the unit that Janey Marvin was already working on. It was the female criminal unit, which took the overflow of the male criminals. And as I read some of the what was called brown files of these patients and read their record, I began to get scared of even going out and interacting with those clients. And what I ultimately learned was that deep down, every one of us as a human being is the same. We have the same needs, desires, we have different life experiences. And that if you treat people with respect, if you care about them, then they have the courage to look at themselves and deal with themselves. If they're in a negative, unsafe environment, they may do what you tell them to do, but they're not going to be able to look at themselves and deal with themselves. 2 weeks after I began working at the state hospital with Janey Marvin, Janey's mother died. And that was a traumatic event. Her mother was the only safe thing in her life. With all the various forms of abuse that she experienced. And so all of these things became real again. Janey began to go to some therapists. And there is something, was when I met her, I think probably always in Janey's life, there is something very unique about Janey Marvin. These therapists each noticed that with the background that she had, she did not respond to life as they expected her to and as others had. And so rather than wanting to assist Janey, they wanted to record Janey and her uniqueness. Janey was not seeking that. And one day, sitting in the RN office at the state hospital, she came in and sat by my desk and said, "Linda, would you be my therapist?" And quite literally, I put my head on the desk and I said to myself, "Oh my God, what do I know about this?" And found myself writing on a little scratch piece of paper, "Let's go for it." And that began a completely life-changing event for me, and certainly for Janey Marvin. We had a 10-minute break, as we did on every shift. We worked the afternoon shift, and we went out and sat on a bench in the children's playground unit. And Janey took what we had left of a 10-minute break to begin sharing her story. And you do not share family secrets. So there was a fear within Janey of what's going to happen now that I've said something about what happened in my past. I think even beyond that, at least for me listening, it was incomprehensible for me as a human being to comprehend how anybody could have experienced the kinds of things that Janey Marvin experienced. As we stood up to go back from break, Janey collapsed to the ground just from the emotional impact of having shared and what she shared with me. From that moment on began the most incredible experience in my life. To come in contact with some of the real ugliness that happens sometimes in life, and also learning how to deal with that and to help somebody heal. So over, I would say that was end of 91, early 92, probably all through 92 and through 93, Janey was sharing her story. And hopefully Janey was receiving some love, understanding, and compassion. And if you've been in a negative environment, what do you do with that kind of stuff? We form our beliefs in our programs that we create about how life is supposed to be. And if your life is ugly, if it's abuse, what do you do with niceness? It's not right. I mean, inside of us, if we dealt with those kinds of ugly things, what do you do? What do you even think about somebody being kind and loving to you? So it's been a very incredible, world-changing experience for both Janey and I.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. When I think about what I was just talking about with Janey about going back to 1973, the older I get, the more I realize that there's no need to regret things that have happened in the past. Because without our past choices, none of us would be sitting here together right now. And how could we help the people, your clients, right now if we hadn't have gone through it? I mean, it's like if there was no addiction, there would be no sobriety. And it's taken me a long time, and you guys have played a vital role in this, but realizing that, this essentially is what caused me to start wanting to tell my story. Because I realized that every time I told it, my perspective of it changed, which essentially is me changing, right? Is it not? So I understand now why Janey and why you guys say that it's important to do past timeline work. I used to be one of these people that think, we should just be focused on the present. And frankly, I felt like a lot of 12-step and AA groups spend way too much time focused on the past. I felt like they get together and they tell the same war stories, and they just focused on the past story and kind of never get to a point where they start setting goals and focusing on the future. But, maybe that was something inside of me. I don't know if you guys have had similar experiences. But I see it now why we have to tell our stories. And it's also a difficult thing, though. I mean, right now there's things about my story I would like to tell, but there's other people that are involved in that story that aren't really that excited about me telling it. So it's a work in progress. So you guys have an amazing story. So Janey goes through this trauma, uses drugs. Linda, I don't know how else I would describe it, but to go back to school to get a degree with 10 kids, that would probably be somewhat traumatic as well. I mean, yeah. So I think that we could unpack that and stay here for quite a while just digging into that. But let's move forward. When did you guys decide, and how did that come about when you decided to start a business? To take your stories, put them together, and express yourself, kind of in the free market and to help people in the same time?
Well, I think that evolved out of learning Janey's story, understanding what the patients that we were dealing with, how they felt, what they needed, watching the patients, and also watching the staff. There's a lot of power that we as people working in the human development field, I know I have a lot of power over somebody's life. I can just write something in a court note and change their life. And watching, and this is my perspective, but watching the patients and their interactions and their needs, and the staff, and how sometimes the staff would get power hungry. They love takedowns. And I learned that as individuals, we're the same. And if you treat people with love, And respect, you get it back. And I used to get down on my knees or haunches and talk to the patients, and the staff was very concerned that I was going to get hit. I didn't get hit. Nobody swung at me, but they knew how I felt about them, and they felt safe in the environment. So as those interplays went on, we believed that we could do something that would be more helpful to people. And a lot of that involved love and respect. And we started MATR. We incorporated with the state of Utah in June of 1993. And we began with youth corrections, and then DCFS was added in 1997, chose to work with adults instead of the youth, mostly because of all the involvements of all the different people, and we couldn't work directly. Well, we worked directly with the youth, but there were so many other people with their agendas involved that we felt it would be better to work with the adult generation. And so that's what we did. And believing that we needed to have an environment where people felt safe enough that they could begin looking at themselves and deal with the issues. Because no matter what my behaviors are, and now in Janey's work, it's open and closed systems, and the closed system is the addictive system. Well, if I go back to my medical training, cells have to have a permeable membrane. In order for our body to function, there has to be communication between all the chemicals and all the different aspects of a body. And if that isn't working, if it's closed off, we're going to die. And that same homeostasis occurs also with us and ourselves and our beliefs and our interactions with other people. So create an environment that's safe. And then I can begin to look at the scary things about me. And the scary things about me may be, being abused, or I've hurt other people, or they may be as simple as my dad told me that I was never going to learn. You don't ever keep your room clean, Linda, or you don't get good enough grades, or whatever it is. And whatever I create from that, believing I'm good, or I'm deserving, or I'm not deserving, or I'm a failure, whatever those are, they become closed programs. And we can't move forward in our life until we begin to open those. And if I have a critical environment that I'm being placed in, I might be obedient to you. I might be rebellious too. But I might be rebellious, or I might be compliant with you, but looking at myself is scary because of all the things I believe about myself. And so the environment, I believe, needs to be caring and loving, while at the same time, sometimes we need to get nudged a little bit and pushed a little bit because we don't want to look at those things. But somebody needs to know that they're cared about, even if it's scary.
Okay, so you guys were working in a more of a structured environment, and you recognized that some of the staff wasn't taking their job as serious as they should have been, as far as the implications it had on people's lives. And that was part of your motivation to start MATR, because you said, surely we can apply moral love and get better results with people than what's going on here. Is that right? I'll just say that when you say, and sometimes people need to be nudged a little bit. I remember when I came into MATR, if you guys remember, one of my biggest fears was like public speaking and praying in front of people. It became one of those closed systems, or as Janey would say, it was something I would skip in my firing order. I avoided it. I mean, I remember going to a restaurant and not being able to order just with my family. I just sat there, and I was 20 years old, and I couldn't order food, right? And I remember when I was here, Linda, you were one of the ones that pushed me. And one time we had a prayer over our food, and you asked me to say it, and I didn't want to. And I got all the chemicals and all the experiences, and my face was sweating. But at that point, I was ready to face that stuff, because what you're saying is I had a safe environment. And the older I get, the more I realize that all my environments are pretty safe. So it's okay for me to do things even if I mess up, right? So I'm a product of your guys' system, that if you create a safe environment, then you can face whatever you've been confronting. And is it right that once you face those things, then you're less likely to need to cope with other substances and avoid, drugs and alcohol and things like that?
Drugs and alcohol, or any behaviors we have that's a closed system, is due to the underlying feelings, the underlying beliefs, the underlying programs that we have. And it's an escape, a way to deal with things that I can't face. So I avoid it. So it may be I retreat and I stay in bed all day. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. And those become my excuses for not having to look at myself and deal with myself. But if I could take it back just a little bit more, and I talk to the clients a lot about this, and maybe I shouldn't, but I can't keep my mouth shut, and that is, we came into mortality for experience. And there's nobody in heaven saying, "Oh, Linda, can't you ever get it right?" They're encouraging me, loving me to have the experience and learn from it. And that's the purpose of our being here. And so when you talked about not being able to say the prayer or order your food, there was something inside of you that was scaring you about experiencing something. And yet it was necessary for you to experience it and recognize how incredible you really are. And by taking that challenge and beginning to recognize who Randy is, look at what you're becoming now. Absolutely incredible. And that was because, for whatever reason, you felt safe enough to look at yourself and see that I'm not that bad. I'm okay. I'm safe. It's going to be okay. And you're doing it.
Thank you. I accept that. Okay, Janey, you're back in the hot seat. I'm just convinced with our modern way of life that with the structure in which we live in, especially with like our modern economy, it's moving at such a fast pace, and it's changing so much. It's no longer this somebody builds a building and has an idea and then hires people to invest in his dream, and they come and they spend their time in that building and they provide services, and people come to that building for services. Now people can get online and they can go directly to you specifically for whatever services they want. And when I think about how many college students are graduating from school and not finding jobs, when I think about a lot of the useless information that's being taught in the colleges and the cost of the colleges, and when I also think about the atmosphere of kind of an entrepreneurial mindset, I can't help but think, and this is just my opinion at this point, I hope to prove it, but I firmly believe that there is nobody that's going to be more qualified to become successful in this economy in the future than somebody who's been through addiction and is in sobriety. Now, that, I'm not saying that had I never done drugs and had I just focused on business and done that I wouldn't be more successful as far as maybe finances are concerned. But when I sit down with somebody who's been through addiction, like you guys or your clients, and they talk about how they want to help people, it's a completely different atmosphere than sitting down in just some business group or networking group and people talking about how they want to help people.
Oh yeah, a whole different mindset, a whole different intent. A big difference. And don't you think, Randy, that because of that difference behind that business then is a heart and soul that, you can hardly stop. Like with me, from years ago, when my going from maximum security inmate one day to administration that same day, I went as myself. There were some experiences where, some of the psychiatrists and those kinds of people who had always been Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so to me, that same day said hello to me. And I said, hello, Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so. And they said, oh, contraire, call me John. And I thought, how sad. Today you're John. Now at 2 o'clock you're John. At 10 o'clock you were Doctor. Be real. Be a real human being. I completely agree with you. The other thing about the addict, alcoholic in recovery, totally in recovery, is not only the passion that they have and the intent, the purpose of why whatever their career they choose. Boy, when they learn to take what they used to be willing to give up and do to chase the drink or the fix, and now they're chasing their education, they're chasing, helping others somehow, whatever it might be. I think their ultimate goal is to help others. That's a big passion. That's a lot of dedication. It takes a very dedicated person to be an addict alcoholic, and that dedication doesn't disappear once you overcome the substance addiction.
I mean, we could dive into this, all day and not even begin to scratch the surface of how I think that, like, for example, I remember one time when I was taking pills, I went to California with Walmart for training. I got a job at a distribution center. And I, as addicts do, before I left, I said, okay, I've got 16. If I take 2 a day, I'll have enough to where I won't be sick and I can come home. Well, the third day there, they were partying, so I took them all. Well, then I still have 5 days left in California. I'm sick. So I call in sick to work that day. And what do? I start walking the streets of California asking strangers. And that was 10 years ago. Have I ever taken any of my business ventures that seriously since? No. It's because, obviously when we're on a substance or something, we're motivated by that desire to live. But if we can shift that, if we can help people shift that. Another thing I want to talk about here with you guys is Linda talked a little bit about open and closed systems. And I know that you have a book. I know that you have a lot of material about open and closed systems. So when it comes to taking a closed system, somebody who's not open to feedback and who's, basically not humble, am I right in thinking that one of the ways to become an open system is to start expressing yourself, to start speaking up, to start sharing how you feel and what you think? Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, being an open system's got to be open to whatever the feedback in the environment is. So, for example, if it's in a family and they're closed, so they have an addiction, the family's got to be willing to express their feelings to the addict. And the addict has got to learn to become open to that feedback, and the addict's got to learn to be able to express themselves back. Well, you don't do that in anger. You don't do that yelling. So, yes, absolutely. An open system has got to learn to be able to honestly express themselves, and that's where also you've got to have that safe environment that they can express themselves in.
When it comes to, let's just say, like a Steve Jobs, right? He started Apple, the iPhone. His entire life was dedicated to providing a service, to providing a product. To me, when you think of somebody like that, and when you think of entrepreneurship, to me, like, entrepreneurship is the ultimate expression of self, because there's different people. There's, like, I'm realizing now as I get older that I just can't stop. Like, this little seed that's in me just keeps growing, and the only thing I can do is feed it, because if I don't, it just hurts. Like, something is wrong. And I just feel like the more we can help, especially recovering addicts and addicts, see that, look, like, there's this whole other perspective on life that actually is going to give you something I call the addict advantage. These experiences are going to serve you. They're going to serve you in the market, and there's no limit. You know, somebody may come through your program and they may not be able to put together a beautiful resume. You know, maybe they've got a history, maybe they're a felon or something like that. But they could build a website and sell a product or a service in 48 hours. And if it's the right product and the right service for the right reasons, people are going to buy it. You know, and I think we have to do better as a society in general of promoting entrepreneurship and business ownership, but especially in the rehabs and in the facilities, and helping people see that. And to me, it just falls in line with the open and closed system, like truly expressing yourself. And the reason I bring this up is because I feel like I've gone through phases. I feel like I was a very closed system before I entered your guys' facility. I became pretty open at that time. And then after that, I served a mission, a 2-year service mission for my church, and I was fairly open. But that space, between that space, what I wanted to do is what I'm doing right now. Well, when I got back from that mission, I got back into being normal. I just got settled into doing what most people do, you know, borrow money, pay it back, build credit, build your reputation, stay clean, just the basics. And I realized, you know, just a few years ago that I had truly stopped expressing myself again. So that even though I was sober, for the most part, there was a few times where I wasn't truly practicing the things you guys taught me. And since I've started to do that, I've realized there's a whole nother layer of sobriety. There's a whole nother perspective on life in general when it comes to what's possible. And it's frankly, it's changed the way I see addiction. It's even caused me to question if I consider myself an addict anymore, if I consider that I always will be. You know, this is something I want to ask you, Linda. And when it comes to, I don't read in the scriptures, and there's a lot of voices I listen to that I feel that I don't read where we hear that men can, you know, once basically you're wounded, you're always wounded, with something like addiction. And I know you guys talk a lot about nerves that wire together, fire together, and I guess my question is, but I also understand none of us are perfect. There was only one person who walked this earth that was perfect. You know, I believe that Adam and Eve fell, and then I believe that Christ atoned for our sins. So I'm just going to be honest with you, I'm still in the middle of this. I'm not sure what I believe or how I feel about this right now. But I can't help but wonder if there's something flawed with this thought and this accepted belief of today that says, I will always be an addict. Can you shed some light on it for me?
Oh, I can share my belief. And I don't know if I said this way back when you were here, but I have this question. If a lizard can grow a new tail, why can't we? Whatever it is that's missing. I think that we have the innate, inborn, eternal power to do so that we don't know how to tap into. And of course, being mortal, we're not perfect. So sometimes our bodies aren't perfect, and we may not be able to overcome every single thing and perfect. So we have an immortal body at this point. But why would we be limited to always being an addict. And if I go back to the open and closed system again, an addict is any closed system, not necessarily as we define it in our society, where it's pornography or it's drugs or it's alcohol. It's any program that we've created that has no permeability, so we're stuck. I think if we become unstuck and we begin to progress and grow, then we move beyond whatever closed system caused us to be an addict. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. I guess I've just realized lately that, AA, for example, or 12-step, for example, there's people that have always gone to the same meetings and always, said the same thing that I say, that Janey says, that a lot of us say that, hi, I'm Randy, I'm an addict. And I've realized now that that's what I'm really saying is I have to remain humble enough to remember that I could always make these same mistakes again. This could happen. But I don't have to put my entire identity in that.
You were created in God's image. You are awesome, incredible, Randy, who's made some mistakes along the line with a purpose. Though we don't always know that purpose when we do it. But it's to educate us. It's to make us better and fuller, wise. If we'll take it that way, if we'll look at it and learn from our mistakes. And so if you're learning from your mistakes and you're moving forward, why then would you keep yourself locked back in that addiction, whatever it is? You're not. You're growing, you're fuller, you're wiser, you're better. You're living up to your potential. That's my belief.
What about these people who would say, if, for example, if I were to come out tomorrow and say I'm no longer in recovery? Of course, I've researched a little bit, Janey, the word recovery, and doesn't mean coming back to self. So obviously that that doesn't apply, but I don't think a lot of people recognize that. I think a lot of people who say I'm a recovering addict, at least I did, feel like they're wounded, like they're scarred, and that scar will never go away, and they kind of get lost in that. But what would you say to people who, if I were to wake up tomorrow and say I'm no longer in recovery, as it's commonly understood, who would say, well, he's only weeks away from a relapse?
And I'd say, congratulations. Wonderful. Let's go for it.
That's something I was just curious about. I mean, I'm just sharing with you guys openly some of the stuff, some of the thoughts I've had. So,
if I could add another part, and this is, I'm 71 years old, and so I've done a lot of learning and thinking and experiencing. But as I look at the purpose of mortality and the reason that we needed a Savior to pay the price for our sins, and heaven knew we were going to sin. That's the war. The war in heaven was, do we let them have agency or not? If we let them have agency, they're going to mess it up. They're going to make all kinds of mistakes. Well, yeah, why was Heavenly Father wanting us to make mistakes or to have the opportunity to? So we could grow, so we could become better than we are. So therefore, the bigger plan was to have a Savior come and pay that price. So as a family, we could all return to heaven together, which was the ultimate purpose. So, to live in our sins? No. It's down here, education. And as we gain the education and we grow, we discover who we really are and all the possibilities of eternity. That's what we're about. So when we talk about addiction in the terms of what society says addiction is, well, there was a lot of different purposes for that. One of them, get our attention. One of them, to educate us, educate other people in the process, and understand and grow. So that it's an eternal progression. And this is one phase of eternal progression.
Thank you. Okay, Janey. before we close here, before we end, somewhere somebody's listening to this that has related and connected with your story specifically, and they want to take their life and improve it, whatever that may look like. What do you say to them? I mean, if you had 45 minutes to share a message with the entire world on addiction, or 5 or 10 minutes, what would you say? What have the conglomerate of your life experiences brought you to at this point?
Boy, well, you brought it up a bit ago, I think, when you were talking about what if I'd taken 10 minutes and made a different choice, and I just would have found somebody else. I guarantee I wouldn't have had a needle in my arm that night. Whatever life brings, not that we don't have choice, but regardless of the choice that we make, there's always hope. There's always something we can do. There must needs be opposition in all things. Right isn't wrong and wrong isn't right. But it doesn't matter what right there is. Wrong can come from it. Be careful. Keep an eye on it. No more than whatever wrong we do. There's right in it somewhere. Look for the right and turn our wrongs into right. And so I think one of the other things I'd say is that our worldview makes the world a difference. No pun intended. What was I viewing back there in probably 73 with my ever first fiance going to take me through the temple? How was I viewing the world, and who did I take it out on? Me. And we do that so often, Randy. We view the world here, and we're like, oh, I don't like that about the world. I'm going to go make a stupid decision, and I'm going to hurt me. It's us we hurt by the way we view the world. That's what I'd say. Change the way you view the world. Change your worldview.
So I'm hearing this, and I want to change my worldview.
Well, I'd start it simple. Whatever it is that you're seeing right in the world, be aware that there might be wrong along with it. Whatever you see in the world that looks wrong, look again, because there might be something right to come of it. It can break down a lot more refined than this. You mentioned, misfiring century firing orders, and it does break down to the firing orders, but the nutshell of it is, if you'd like to change your worldview, if you see anything that makes you feel on top of the world, look again. There's nothing in the world to put you on top of the world. Nothing in the world's ever put me up there. I put me up there, or I bring me down. Whatever you see in the world that takes you down, no, it doesn't. It's our self-limiting beliefs, our self-limiting views is all that's being triggered by all we see in the world. Overcome ourselves. Did I give a hint of any of it with that quickly? What did I see? I've seen it. Oh my goodness, running a drug and alcohol rehab, to be honest with you, has really taught me. I'd heard sayings, like what we resist persists. The no kind deed goes unpunished. There were years I couldn't even quite get the words together to say that right. And yet today I know what it is. And yet, you know what? Today I'm still not afraid to do kind deeds, even if it appears in my worldview that I'm being punished for them. If I'm doing what's right to me. You mentioned this earlier too. Express ourselves. If I'm doing what's right for me, what's true to me, and I continue to express it, so what? If the world praises me, or so what? If the world, condemns or,
Judges.
Yep, any of them things. So what if the world judges and condemns me? So what? Am I being true to me? Am I expressing me? I know when you're out there, especially if it's depending on the depth that you're there, it may seem like, yeah, that's easy to say. You know what? Start doing it. It isn't that. Take it one step at a time. Find one safe environment, one safe person, that you can call in. Nobody has to see you call in on a radio station and say, hey, I want to confess something. Come on, express ourselves. That's it. Make sense?
Yeah. I've noticed a pattern, over my life, especially recently, where just talking about things like really changes it, really changes his perspective on it. So, one question, real quick. Tell me about some of the, I guess, what you found about how our brains work in your studies over the years. Any part of it that specifically comes to mind, but what amazes you most about the human brain?
Well, if it's amazed me most, I'd have to talk capacity. It's said that Albert Einstein used 10% of his brain. He was considered to be a genius. They actually have cut his brain up, and it got sold in small pieces. I think 200 pieces. Albert Einstein's brain throughout the world. If you're going to talk about amazement, it's the capacity of the human brain. It's limitless. It's limitless. If you want to talk, maybe more of a why didn't anybody tell me this before basis, it's that nothing's really coming to conscious. We think it is. Nothing's really coming to conscious just in and of itself. Everything's coming from the subconscious. So what's already coming is what's already programmed into our worldviews and our self-limiting beliefs and those kinds of things. So boy, what a struggle as a human being just because we have the subconscious. So
When you say, so what is that? What are you saying then? Are you saying that so much of who we are and what we do is based on how we were raised?
Yep, and our from the time we were first born until we're about 8 years old, we're programmed, and it's just to the subconscious. It's just sensory data, and that's what talk about your worldview. How did I interpret the environment as I grew up, or you? So here's these children today growing up. How did they interpret their environment? What was going on? And then what was their conscious response to that environment? And that conscious response to the environment, worldview, is what becomes the master of the program, the direction the program's going to go. The directions the program's going to go. So my worldview as a child, being raised by an alcoholic father, I'm having fun with my daddy. My conscious response being, this is fun. I enjoy this. We're laughing and this is neat. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit difficult to get out of that role. The whole everything that we think, that you can't have a thought come up to conscious without it coming from your subconscious already programmed models, pre-programmed, pre-modeled. You can create new models. You can't change your old models either. You will always be vulnerable to, how I say is that I don't have a drink, I have a drunk. I've never had a drink, I always have a drunk. That old program's always going to be there. You can create a new program. If Albert Einstein used 10%, we got a lot of our brain we can use because I'm no Albert Einstein. So
nerves that wire together fire together, right? Studies have shown that 90 days of a new thought or a thought connected with an emotion becomes the primary thought pattern that your brain will take. Is that right?
Yeah, you can definitely change the neural paths. You can create new neural paths. You start getting the emotion like you talk about. So you have the chemical encoding along with the brain wave, and you can create a pretty powerful program in a short period of time.
Let's say that I create a new path, and I feed it with emotion, imaginary and real. Like I actually, begin to live my life in a new way. If I heard you just right, what you're saying is even after 10 or 20 or 30 years of doing that and strengthening that new neural pathway, the primary neural pathway still exists, even though it will be small and maybe fragile after years. Will it always exist?
Once it becomes a complete program model, you have it for the rest of your life.
So what qualifies as a complete program model? I mean, obviously, me being 23 years old and doing drugs would qualify.
Yeah, definitely. We're completely, we're talking identity, personality, behavioral, thought patterns. Every aspect of our total being is nothing but program models, is all that it is, that were created from the time that we were born. Those program models are always going to be there. We can create new thought patterns, new emotional responses, new behavioral patterns. At the same time, those old ones are always going to be there. There may be cross neurofires through the dendrites and different things to these other programs. They'll pop up in your head. Even after decades of sobriety, it can pop up. Maybe a drink, maybe a hit off a reefa. Every now and then I'll think of my old hookah, whatever. They're still there. The neural paths are going to continue to fire. So, I think one of the key things is something that you've mentioned, we've talked about a little bit, and that's that self-expression. The moment we start in tolerating or indulging or sympathizing with our worldview to a point of not being able to continue to express ourselves, whether it's, well, they don't want me to talk, so I'll be still. Oh, nobody's going to want to hear what I have to say, so, I'll wait. Whatever it might be, if we deny ourselves self-expression, we're asking for those whole programs to come back. Addiction, one of the ways we talk about addiction here at MATR and in some of our books, is addiction is avoiding the unavoidable. Well, what's unavoidable? The self. It's the self. If you're addicted, you're using drugs, you're using alcohol, any kind of addiction, it doesn't have to be a substance. You're avoiding the unavoidable, yourself. You can't move. I hear people, oh, well, I'm going to move up to this over to this other state. Oh, wow. Could I talk to you first? Who's going with you? Yourself. How about if we stop denying ourselves? So, and it is expression. It's recognizing myself. What power do I have? What weakness do I have? What potential? What strengths do I have? What desires? What are my goals? Then let's work on them.
I'm confused because this whole process of expressing ourselves, we're really just expressing our programs, are we not? So how does it end a program just by expressing it? Does it bring it to light? Because essentially, if I'm, or all of us, if it's coming out of our mouth, wasn't it sent to our mouth from our subconscious? If it's sent from there, wasn't a program there from our childhoods?
Well, and we can talk about from the very beginning of the programming going in the first place. We teach it here when we talk about how the difference between conscious and subconscious and the functions between the two. And the subconscious, any data that comes in, and it does come into the subconscious, it gets processed and stored before it ever comes to conscious. Any of that data, the subconscious does a thing called reverse effect, where it makes the opposite data of what just came in. So there is opposite or opposition in all things. If you know how to be an addict, you already know how to be in recovery. If I talk a lot about, you cannot neurologically through your neurofires, you cannot put the words together. The words can't go together in the subconscious for a question without the opposite words being in there, and that's the words for the answer. If you have the question, you have the answer. It's impossible to have to formulate the question without having the answer. For every program you have, you already have the opposite, the same amount of data. It's referred to as unavailable, untrained, unskilled potential within you because you've never recognized that you had it. I got him more confused.
No, I'm feeling it there, so that makes sense to me. Especially this part where you're saying that if you have the question, you already have the answer within you, but because we haven't developed, maybe because we haven't sat in a padded room and paid attention to nothing.
There's a lot of nothing, Randy.
Maybe that would help us develop a little bit more, right, about the answer to some of these questions.
Well, and just the way that the brain, knowing the way the brains worked when I went to school, and I got my master's, and I realized the first semester I went, I don't want to do hypnotherapy with people and things like that. I want to teach people how their brains work. Everybody's got a brain. They ought to know how it functions and how to operate it. And so that's one of the things that we teach. So in the more I've learned along those lines, and then studying the holographic human transformation theory and the different physics laws that have to do with all about our programming and our programs and how we are the way we are, to me it also just reinforces the fact of what incredible beings we are, and we had to have God made us. We are made in His image. I don't think He's going to have to do anything with our brain when we get there for us to be all-knowing beings again, except pull the little veil between conscious and subconscious, and we'll know it all again. That's my take.
Okay, I think we'll sum it up there. I'm just going to say one thing here, and then I'm going to ask one of you to explain if somebody wants to get in touch with you or find more about you or your program or your information, how they do that. I sit right now with Janey and Linda, the owners of MATR, and when I first came into this building, we stopped at a gas station on the way here, and I did some pills, and I got here, and it was great that night. I made a lot of friends, but here I am 10 years later, and I'm talking to these two, and my if you could see me, my ears are smoking. Seriously, Janey's, the depth that she knows on the brain, we're going to have to do more than one episode and dive into some of this stuff more. But from the moment I walked in here, that's not what impressed me. What impressed me was the love that I felt, and also the freedom that I had to learn through my experiences how to be sober again. And they provided that for me. But I walked in here having been, snorting Oxycontin up my nose and avoiding who I was for several years. And, the reason I'm even saying this is because I just want anybody out there who may be listening to know that you can get help, that you can start to express yourself, that the tools are available for you to learn how to overcome it. So if that little I am, whatever that is inside of you, if it's peaked right now in any way, I'm sure that all three of us would just encourage you to take the first step. whatever that may be. And just take that one step. You don't have to take any large steps. Just take the one step. So I want to thank Janey and Linda. You guys have done a lot for me, and thank you for taking the steps to create MATR and to have an environment and a facility where people can come and feel safe and feel love. So Janey, where would somebody go if they wanted to find more about you guys and your material?
Well, we actually have a website that's just www.matrbehavioralhealth.com. We're on Facebook quite a bit. Linda Demick has her own. Janey Marvin, I have my own. Then MATR Behavioral Health has a Facebook. And then we also have a Know Thyself Transform, where we go into some of the ways the brains work and the holographic human transformation theory and things on Know Thyself. So it's the facility phone number is 435-462-2781. We're open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and if we don't answer the phone, which we usually do, we'll get back with you right away if you leave a message.
Great. And when you say MATR, how's that spelled?
MATR is actually an acronym. It's all capital MATR. Stands for Measures of Affect Theoretically Relative. It's kind of our way of saying, okay, so we are clinical, we're treatment oriented, we're licensed, and so we have to measure your affect and come up with diagnosis and treatment and those kinds of things. Theoretically relative means, you know what? We care, we intend to get to know you. So Randy, you walked in just like anybody else. Yep, we know why you're coming. At the same time, we know that's not who you are. Who's walking in that door, the reason they're coming does not represent who they are. Theoretically relative. So you're all incredible beings. The human brain has incredible potential. We're all doing whatever it is that we're doing and gone through and going through for a reason. Just don't give up. Find your reason. Your multiplicand, as they call it.
Multiple what?
Multiplicand.
Multiplicand?
MULTIPLICAND. Multiplicand. It's the ultimate purpose. What's the ultimate purpose? That's what it all comes down to. What's the ultimate purpose here? So, in anything we do, what's the ultimate purpose? You talked about that, the difference between an addict and alcoholic versus your general businessman. General businessman ultimate purpose might be, make lots of money. The recovering addict alcoholic business person, general purpose, what's their multiplicand? Is to help others. If money comes, then it does. If I'm able to live, then I do. My ultimate purpose is to do good for others. So, multiplicand.
And even if it doesn't come, there's abundant wealth.
Oh, absolutely.